I'm going to go ahead and start recording. And whenever you're ready, you can go ahead.
Sounds good. Thank you, Gigi. Happy to be here and be hanging out with some more BBB people. It's always good. I'm so glad it keeps on going. My name's Ben Walsh, and I worked on that BBB team for 5 years. And I did that when I came to CU to do my PhD in literacy studies. Before that, I was a 9th and 10th grade teacher. I taught English and history at a school in Brooklyn, which was entirely project-based, and all my students were recent immigrants. They'd all come to the US within the last few years. And so I did a lot of incorporating technology and humanities and always trying to bring real, authentic social problems into my classroom. So getting involved in BBB was a great fit for me. And I'm going to share my screen here. And I will share these slides with you in a moment when I'm done. So a few years ago, I had the opportunity to co-teach Build a Better book in several multilingual high school classrooms. I worked with a couple different teachers, and we did it 2 different years. And I think we worked with about a total of 8 different classrooms, and it went great. And I want to start with putting this in big, bold letters and reading it out loud because it's so important. I really believe that multilingual students are chronically underestimated and under-challenged in our schools. This could be a multi-hour presentation on its own, but I think projects like BBB can really help. This is the sort of work that can fit beautifully into English language development classes like the ones that I worked in. And one student wrote in her reflection after this, she said, "I liked learning 3D design and sound design because kids like us don't get to do stuff like this," which is really sad and upsetting, but we did it and it fit beautifully. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about why it works, why it's important, and then also how to do it. One of the beautiful things about projects like BBB is how it can reveal powerful literacies that aren't associated with standard academic English. Too often, students like Christina and Alvin, who I quote here, they're really judged only on their ability to read and write standard academic English. And all the other skills they bring to school and develop in school seemingly don't count. So I'm going to share a couple examples. This is Alvin's crafted tactile page. I bet most of you have, did you guys do this in the last couple days? I'm guessing something like this. Okay, so we read fables and they had to create an illustration from the fable using craft materials. And we do this as a way of developing their skill as tactile designers, their understanding of tactile design principles. And this is what he said afterwards. He said, "I thought the bug was about the legs. Like that was the important part to feel. And with the owl, I just use feathers. You can't really feel the shape, but you can feel the feathers." So as we did this, these students are very critical of their own designs and developing their understanding of tactile design principles. So this literacy of how to design in this way is something they all designed, they developed very effectively. We saw this growth from their initial crafted books to the 3D printed, more final books they developed later on. So this is a book that was designed by that same student, Alvin, later, where he's 3D printing a bear and he's using fake fur to show the texture. And this little QR code here links to sound effects, and he has his Braille text here, and he has the printed text. And blending these different things together is a form of multimodal design, which is very much recognized as essential to language arts instruction now, right? So the text we encounter on a daily basis on our phones and our computers, it's rarely just printed text anymore. We're blending visuals and audio and all sorts of things together. So bringing this into a classroom is very much an authentic form of composition and expression. which these students did very, very well. And they also were really quite skilled 3D designers. This is something that Alvin said about his process of designing his bear. He said, we had to cut them and shrink in half, cut them in half and shrink, because the bear was like a whole bear, but it has to be flat to glue it on. So you cut it in half, but if the legs aren't flat, it won't print. If you cut it right down the middle and the legs are in the air, but with my bear, I rotated it so the legs were lower. That one on the left hind leg is still up a little bit, but it printed pretty good. And you can feel around the feet, which is good for the blind kids. So he's demonstrating this awareness of both the process of designing and how his design impacts his audience. It's really quite sophisticated. Another example of, so yeah, and he saw himself as becoming this expert in 3D design, and his classmates saw him the same way, and his teachers saw him in this way. And there were other expert identities that come up. There's one student named Jorge, who just became really skilled in Braille, in both, he wrote English and Spanish Braille. And he said, Braille's like a code, you know? It's like a language, but also a code. So I just figured it out. And when his classmates needed help and they were a little bit stuck, they would come to him to get help with the Braille. And so as these expert identities start to emerge and students recognize themselves this way and their teachers see themselves in this way, it can be really different than the paradigm of where they're only judged on their ability to read or write English, right? It's this really important shift in this kind of context. And the teachers we've worked with say things like, wow, I've never seen him like that, or oh, I saw him in a totally different light after he was involved in this project. So that's a little bit about the why, a little bit about the how now. So one of the important things I think in working in a multilingual classroom, doing a project like this is what you can call fostering a translanguaging space. So translanguaging is a theory that comes out of linguistics, but it's really becoming popular in education circles as well. And it tells us that it's natural for humans to communicate across and beyond languages. And this is 60% of the people on Earth are multilingual. And this is the normal way people communicate. And so across languages means you're blending features from multiple languages, words and grammars from multiple languages and putting them together. So in this classroom, students would say that I speak Spanglish. That's the main way I communicate. And it goes beyond language because sometimes when you blend languages, you create meanings that aren't available within a single language, or you're bringing in things that aren't part of language. You're bringing in gestures, you're bringing in facial expressions. So when you create a classroom where this sort of free and open and creative and instinctive communication is valued and encouraged, it opens up a lot of possibilities. And it also welcomes students into the classroom. It values who they are and what they bring. And BBB is a project where creative and sometimes unconventional communication is vital, right? That's what we're all trying to do, is invent new ways of telling stories in creative meaning. So constraining communication in this sort of context and saying English only is really antithetical to the values of the project. And I love this quote from this one student, Karina. She said, "Mister, sometimes it's hard to talk to people who don't speak Spanish and English." Okay, moving on. I want to have a chance for questions. I want to add that you don't need to be multilingual to operate in a space like this, right? So I taught for 11 years with people speaking sometimes 15 languages in the same room as me. And if we didn't let people use whatever communicative resources they had, it was hard to talk to each other. But when it was free and open and you can translate and you can search for pictures on your phone and do whatever, you can really build a community and communicate well. And Jorge said to me during this project, yeah, it's like, he's talking about how some teachers were nervous about having other languages in the class. He said, yeah, it's like maybe they're scared if they don't understand us. But when you use both of them, you can connect more. It's crazy, but I think it's cool being bilingual and learning 2 languages. In valuing multilingualism here is not only about fostering communication. For these students, it also gave the project purpose. So for Jorge, he said, this was about his decision and just why he wanted to make a Spanish book in this class. So his group translated a book and they had to shorten the text, and it was quite an involved process. So he wanted to do a Spanish book because you said there aren't a lot of books for blind kids, and probably in Spanish, there's no book for blind kids. And I responded, I don't know the numbers, but I bet tactile picture books in Spanish are rare and very hard to find in the US. Exactly. So for me, that was the first thing. Sorry, I've got my Zoom window is blocking the text. I can't read it. There we go. When you said it could be in Spanish, I was like, I'm doing that. I want to talk about a couple challenges that we kind of wish we'd done better, very specific to working with a multilingual group. One of them was the books we chose. So we were very careful to have an even distribution of Spanish and English books. So a lot of them were books that I just had. We also went to the library. But it turned out with this group that they really wanted to choose, the group that I'm highlighting in this presentation, they were much more interested in storybooks. And it happened that a lot of the Spanish books I had were kind of concept books or counting books, like this one over here, my first Spanish farm book. And students were gravitating to the picture books, and they ended up starting in English and thinking, well, I'll translate it and I'll make it bilingual, but they either didn't have time or they ended up running out of space because we pre-cut the pages to this size, which I think was about 4 by 6. And so once they had their animal and sometimes a texture and a QR code in their Braille, they didn't have room to make it in Spanish and English. So that was something that I wish we'd done differently. In another group, they loved the concept books. We had a bunch of Spanish and bilingual concept and counting books. But those choices, both the size of the page and the books we brought, had some unintended consequences for what students ended up creating in the class. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Only got a few minutes, but I want to open it up for questions here.
Ben, I have a question. Laredo Public Library here, and we have a huge Spanish-speaking population. How do you create an environment that makes them feel comfortable to express themselves in their preferred languages?
Yeah, there's no short answer for that. But I would say that, one of the first things I did with working with these groups was be very explicit about valuing the language that they bring, and that their ability to communicate creatively in blend Spanish and English is valuable in this project, right? That skill lends itself to BBB very much, right? A lot of students, these students you're talking about, they may have grown up like translating for their parents with a doctor or a lawyer. Like they have these amazing skills that aren't valued in school, but I think they really have power in BBB, where it's like, here's the stuff we have. We're going to invent a new way to tell a story. So I come right out and tell them that. I tell them, your multilingualism is going to matter here, right? We're going to use this and build on this. You're going to extend this. Like, we're really glad you're here because you have this. Yeah, and I'm also explicit about saying that I think multilingual students are underestimated and under-challenged. I don't think you can say that in every space. A teacher can get in trouble for saying something like that. But when I think it's okay, I come right out and say it. Any other questions? I think we have a minute.
I'm curious, Ben, in spaces where you've said that to students, how do they react? Do they feel that way too? Do they recognize that?
Yes, especially students who have been in the country longer, or have been in sort of stuck in ESL classes longer. They really believe it. I've always found that the students I've had who've just come to the US have been tend to be less disillusioned. Because I've worked in spaces where multilingualism is valued, and we're working really hard to challenge students while building language skills. But this class that I was working in here, most of the students in that class were born in the US and have been stuck in English language development classes all the way into high school. And they are sick of remedial classes. They are fluent English speakers and writers. They're, as far as like conventions go, they're still developing, right? They've got grammatical problems in their writing, and that's what they're judged on because they haven't passed a test. And they realize they don't have access to the same interesting, challenging curriculum as some of their peers.
I love how posing this design task to them, especially, related to the need and thinking about what that kind of library of tactile books that are available in other languages is and how great that need is, providing that space to you can really make this difference or contribute to this, this need.
Yeah, one of the things I love about BBB is all the different ways students find meaning in it. Right? Almost everybody, it seems like they say, oh yeah, this is a good goal. We should be helping to design better, cheaper books and materials for this population. But you also have students who just become really captivated with 3D design or storytelling. Or in the case of that student, Jorge, he was all about, oh, I'm going to create Spanish resources because there's not enough of them. It's really a project that invites different types of purpose into it, which I think is what the best projects do.
Yeah, Ben, I really like the idea of universal design and then having so many students speaking different languages and coming from different perspectives. Have you found that really helps them and come to a sense of universal design much sooner or much more easily because they have more perspectives to approach something?
I don't know, it's hard to generalize there about, it's almost like, is there this epistemic advantage, right? Is there for people who have grown up communicating across languages and having to be creative in how they communicate and how they access texts, is there an advantage for designing tactile picture books? I think it may well be the case, but I don't have any empirical evidence that's true. But I tend to think it is. There's a researcher named Marjorie Oriana. I can't remember where she is, but she wrote a great book about kids growing up translating. It's not like a scholarly text; it's more of a ethnography, and it's following around students and how they translate for the parents, and how unbelievably complex what they're doing is. Where you have a doctor explaining something to them in medical jargon, and they translate for their mom in much more casual conversational language. So they're not just moving from English to Spanish and back, they're changing kind of the register and the type of words that they're using. And I think that sort of skill probably does have consequences for something like BBB, where you're taking maybe a picture book or a game, and it's not as simple as switching from picture to tactile. There's all sorts of little changes and decisions that you have to make that are difficult. And it comes from trying it multiple times and refining it. And so, yeah, Gigi, I tend to think the experiences of these students does give them an advantage, but I don't have like the data to back it up. It's just my very strong hunch.
Thanks so much, Ben. That was so great to hear your perspective after working with students in multilingual classrooms. That was really terrific. I think we can, Gigi, do you want to pause the recording?
Yeah.
To the next?